March 1943, North Atlantic, 02:17 hours. The ocean was black and empty. Wind moved low across the swells, flattening wave tops into streaks of grey foam. No running lights broke the horizon. No gunfire echoed across distance. For hours, there had been nothing. No sonar pings, no aircraft engines, no shadowed silhouettes against the sky. Inside the German U-boat, the mood shifted carefully. Silence at sea is never neutral. It is either tension or relief. Tonight, it felt like relief. The commander stood beneath the open hatch, binoculars resting against his chest. The stars were faint through cloud cover. The convoy they had attacked earlier was gone, scattered and burning somewhere beyond the dark. No destroyers hunted. No propellers churned nearby. Below deck, the hydrophone operator reported the same conclusion he had given for nearly an hour. Nothing bearing. No screws, no active sonar, no depth charges rolling in patient arcs. The Atlantic felt empty again. After extended evasion, after running deep and slow to avoid pursuit, this absence meant one thing: the escorts had lost contact. The commander allowed himself a measured decision. Surface fully, recharge. Diesel engines coughed to life, vibrating through the hull as the submarine rose into open air. Crewmen moved more freely now. Batteries needed charge, air needed refreshing. A radio transmission would be sent, brief, encoded, reporting success and new course. In the captain's logbook, the entry was short and confident. Area secured, no further contact, altering patrol vector. It was a professional judgment, reasonable, supported by every sensory confirmation available aboard the boat. But hundreds of miles away, inside an Allied tracking station, the picture looked very different. No sonar had been used. No destroyer had maintained visible pursuit. No aircraft had shadowed the submarine. Instead, something quieter had been working, something that did not announce itself with pings or propeller noise. High-frequency direction finding. The moment the U-boat transmitted its earlier report, its signal had been captured. Bearings were plotted, cross-referenced, triangulated across distant stations. Each transmission, no matter how brief, left a fingerprint on the Atlantic. The submarine believed silence meant safety. The Allies understood silence differently. They did not need to chase with noise. They only needed patience. Back on the U-boat's bridge, the commander scanned the horizon again. Nothing moved. No shape betrayed interest. Below, engines roared steadily as batteries charged. Above, the Atlantic remained blank. The logbook entry was accurate from his perspective. The area was silent. But silence is not invisibility. And somewhere beyond the darkness, far enough to remain undetected, ships were already adjusting course, not because they had heard the U-boat, but because they had heard it speak. The U-boat's transmission lasted less than 20 seconds. Short, encoded, efficient. To the commander, it was routine, standard patrol reporting procedure. Contact made, convoy disrupted, area cleared, course altered. Nothing in the message revealed position directly. But the message did not need to. In Britain and across the Atlantic network, Allied HF-DF stations, high-frequency direction finding, nicknamed Huff Duff, were listening continuously. Operators sat with headphones pressed tight, trained to recognize the briefest spike in radio traffic. When the U-boat keyed its transmitter, receivers hundreds of miles apart reacted instantly. A burst of signal. A bearing locked. Time stamped. Within seconds, multiple stations plotted the angle from which the transmission had originated. Lines were drawn across charts, thin pencil strokes stretching across open ocean. Where they crossed, a rough position emerged. Not perfect, but close enough. The submarine believed it had evaded physical pursuit. That was true, No destroyer was tracking it with sonar. No aircraft circled overhead. Instead, the Allies were tracking behavior. German U-boats were disciplined, but disciplined fleets transmit. Reports flowed to command regularly. Orders were acknowledged. Wolfpack coordination required radio traffic. Each transmission, however brief, created geometry. Allied plotting rooms accumulated those geometries patiently. A single bearing provided direction. A second narrowed the estimate. A third confirmed movement pattern. The U-boat's earlier attack had already triggered attention. Its signal had not simply been logged, it had been flagged. When the latest transmission came, area secured, operators did not celebrate. They adjusted. Destroyer escorts operating miles away received updated estimated coordinates, not precise enough to charge recklessly, but sufficient to alter patrol arcs quietly. The order was clear. Close but do not ping. Active sonar would alert the submarine instantly. Depth charges too early would scatter it into unpredictability. Instead, the escorts would maintain passive listening. They would anticipate its course based on transmission timing and known U-boat patrol logic. The Atlantic is vast. But when behavior is mapped carefully, vastness shrinks. Hours after the U-boat logged its zone secure and shifted vector, Allied ships were already adjusting in wide, silent arcs, intersecting projected travel lanes rather than chasing directly. No pings cut through the water. No propellers roared at flank speed. The pursuit was mathematical. Back aboard the submarine, batteries continued charging. Diesel fumes drifted along the surface breeze. The crew relaxed in small, cautious ways, coffee brewed, conversation low, but easier than before. Confidence returned incrementally. The Atlantic looked empty. The hydrophone operator, now off watch, believed the hunt had ended. He was right about one thing. The hunt had changed. Because the most dangerous tracking does not announce itself. It waits until the geometry tightens. And somewhere beyond the horizon, silent, disciplined, Allied destroyers were no longer searching blindly. They were moving toward a point the submarine had unknowingly drawn for them. By 0400 hours, the Atlantic had settled into its cold pre-dawn rhythm. The U-boat ran on the surface at economical speed, batteries nearly recharged. The commander allowed it. Surface travel conserved power and increased range. With no sonar contact for hours, the risk felt acceptable. He altered course slightly west-southwest. It was a logical move. Convoys had shifted lanes. The earlier attack zone was now unproductive. A new vector meant new opportunity. Below deck, the navigator marked the change cleanly across the chart. What he did not know was that Allied plotting rooms had marked the same adjustment before he made it. Based on transmission timing and typical U-boat patrol doctrine, the Allies projected likely escape lanes. Submarines rarely retraced paths immediately after engagement. They repositioned to intercept fresh traffic. So did the escorts. But they did not charge directly toward the estimated location. Instead, two destroyers moved in broad, offset arcs, intersecting not the submarine's last known position, but where it was likely to be hours later. No active sonar. No flares. No signal of intent. Inside one destroyer's operations room, a passive sonar operator leaned forward slightly. Headphones pressed tight. The Atlantic's background noise filled his ears, distant wave slap, occasional merchant screws far beyond engagement range. Then, a faint rhythm. Not loud. Not sharp. Just a low, steady mechanical cadence, inconsistent with natural ocean noise. He did not announce it immediately. He listened. The sound repeated. Diesel screws. Surface running. Bearing steady. The officer of the watch nodded calmly. Maintain silence Adjust course 2 degrees port. No sonar ping followed. No aggressive acceleration. The destroyer altered its path slightly, careful not to create a distinctive acoustic signature. They would not alert the submarine. They would let it sail into certainty. Back aboard the U-boat, the bridge watch rotated. Dawn lightened the eastern horizon faintly. Visibility expanded just enough to show empty sea in every direction. The commander felt vindicated. No aircraft. No escorts. No periscope wakes behind them. He ordered preparations to submerge before daylight strengthened, routine precaution, nothing urgent. The diesels would be shut down. Electric motors would take over. The boat would slip beneath the surface and continue westward submerged for several hours. Below, the hydrophone operator returned to his station as the submarine angled downward. He listened carefully. Nothing. The Atlantic still sounded empty. What he could not hear, what passive sonar at that depth could not yet resolve, was the destroyer repositioning beyond his detection threshold. The escort was not directly astern. It was offset, paralleling course quietly. The U-boat had altered vector confidently. The destroyer had adjusted in response invisibly. No ping betrayed interest. No splash signaled pursuit. The geometry was tightening silently. The submarine believed it had escaped because no one had shouted. The Allies were not shouting. They were closing. And in the Atlantic of 1943, closing quietly was often more dangerous than attacking loudly. The first depth charge had not yet been armed. But the trap was already forming, without a single sound to warn it. At 05:12 hours, the U-boat leveled off at periscope depth. Electric motors replaced diesel vibration. The hum inside the hull softened to a disciplined whisper, ballast trimmed carefully, speed reduced to conserve battery. Routine. The commander believed daylight now belonged to concealment. Above, the Atlantic was turning steel gray as dawn spread outward. Visibility expanded mile by mile. The destroyer, still offset on a converging course, did not accelerate. It did not alter speed dramatically. It simply maintained geometry. Inside its sonar compartment, the operator confirmed the contact more confidently now. Screws steady, bearing unchanged, range decreasing. Still no active ping. The destroyer's captain understood the value of restraint. Active sonar would echo across the water and send the submarine diving deeper in erratic evasion. Patience would allow positioning. Instead of announcing presence, he waited until the range narrowed sufficiently. The U-boat's hydrophone operator, listening intently, heard only distant, scattered merchant traffic. Nothing close, nothing aggressive. The absence reinforced confidence. The captain reviewed his chart again. The earlier attack had been successful. No further contact. Area secured. Altered course. Batteries healthy. He allowed himself a quiet internal conclusion. The hunt was over. What he could not know was that the destroyer had already crossed his projected path. By 05:47 hours, the escort adjusted speed slightly, just enough to ensure it would pass within effective detection range. Then, for the first time, a ping. Sharp, metallic, unmistakable. Inside the U-boat, the sound hit like a physical blow. Hydrophone operator stiffened instantly. Active sonar, bearing starboard. The commander's confidence collapsed in a single heartbeat. Hold! There had been nothing for hours. But the explanation did not matter now. He ordered a rapid dive. Alarm full ahead electric, down angle 10 degrees. The U-boat tilted sharply, diving deeper into darker water. Crew scrambled to stations, valves hissed, instruments rattled as pressure increased. Above, the destroyer maintained contact easily. The sonar return was clean, steady echo off steel hull. Because it had not needed to search blindly. It had already been positioned. The first depth charges rolled off the stern minutes later, not in wild scatter, but in calculated pattern ahead of the submarine's projected descent. The Atlantic that had felt empty was now violently alive. Inside the U-boat, lights flickered as the first detonations erupted in controlled concussions, not direct hits, but close enough to shake bulkheads and rattle nerves. The commander realized the truth too late. Silence had not meant abandonment. It had meant tracking. Every hour without sonar had not been escape. It had been convergence. The destroyer had never lost the U-boat. It had simply refused to announce pursuit. And now, as depth charges walked closer in disciplined arcs, the geometry that had been drawn by a 20-second transmission was closing completely. The logbook entry still read, "Area secured." But the Atlantic had never agreed. And the tracking had never stopped. The first pattern was deliberate. Depth charges detonated not directly overhead, but slightly ahead of the U-boat's projected descent path. The explosions rolled through the water in heavy, controlled concussions, close enough to rattle teeth, far enough to avoid immediate structural failure. This was not guesswork. It was prediction. Inside the submarine, the shockwaves hit like hammer blows, light bulbs flickered, gauges trembled, fine dust shook loose from bulkheads. Crew members braced instinctively, gripping valves and railings as the hull absorbed pressure it had not expected. The commander shouted orders over the echoing steel. Hard port deeper, reduce speed. He needed unpredictability now. But unpredictability requires space, and space was shrinking. Above, the destroyer adjusted calmly. Sonar contact remained firm. The echo returned steady and unmistakable. The U-boat's sharp dive had not broken geometry, it had confirmed it. A second destroyer, positioned miles away, but already informed by the earlier triangulation, closed from the opposite side. No one on the submarine knew that yet. The Atlantic felt like a single hunter. It was already two. The next depth charge pattern came tighter. Explosions cracked closer to the hull, reverberating through compartments with violent metallic resonance. A pipe joint burst in the forward section, spraying fine mist across electrical panels. A crewman shouted as pressure gauges fluctuated briefly before stabilizing. Still no direct hit. But the distance was narrowing. The commander understood the shift now. This was not a destroyer stumbling onto contact by chance. This was controlled prosecution. The enemy had known roughly where to look before the first ping. His earlier confidence turned bitter in retrospect. The radio transmission. It had been necessary. It had also been fatal. Below deck, the hydrophone operator strained to interpret noise through the chaos. Sonar pings continued in steady rhythm, unhurried, disciplined. The destroyer was not rushing. It did not need to. Every maneuver the U-boat attempted was measured, tracked, anticipated. The submarine zigzagged sharply. The destroyer compensated. The submarine slowed to reduce noise. The destroyer tightened pattern accordingly. This was no longer pursuit. It was containment. A third pattern detonated closer still, a heavy blast threw a crewman to the deck. Lights blinked out momentarily before emergency circuits restored dim illumination. Somewhere aft, a gasket failed. Water seeped in a trickle, not yet catastrophic. But morale cracked slightly. The crew had believed they were free. Now they were surrounded by invisible precision. The commander faced the unspoken truth. The escort had not rediscovered them. It had never lost them. The Atlantic that had seemed empty had been mapped quietly through radio geometry. Silence had not meant safety. It had meant alignment. Above, the destroyer captain adjusted once more, calculating the next pattern not from instinct, but from plotted projection of where the submarine must be descending. The trap was no longer theoretical. It was tightening in controlled increments, and each explosion carried the same message through steel and water. You were never alone. The area was never secured, and the tracking never stopped. By 06:20 hours, the U-boat had descended well below routine operating depth. The hull creaked, not catastrophically, but persistently. Steel under pressure speaks in small, unsettling noises. Rivets tick, plates flex microscopically. Every sound feels amplified when explosions are expected. The commander ordered near-silent running. Minimum revolutions, no unnecessary movement. Crewmen froze into discipline, boots lifted carefully, tools secured, voices dropped to whispers. The submarine became an organism holding its breath. Above, the destroyer slowed. Active sonar pulses continued at steady intervals. The echo returned clearly, slightly deeper now but consistent. The captain resisted the urge to rush the attack pattern. The submarine was diving, but diving has limits. Batteries drain, air degrades, steel tolerances narrow. Patience remained the weapon. A second escort joined the pattern. The two ships did not crowd each other. They positioned offset, one maintaining contact, the other preparing to lay charges along predicted evasion arcs. No frantic acceleration, no erratic movement. Just geometry. Inside the U-boat, the hydrophone operator reported faint propeller noise now from two directions. The commander's jaw tightened. It was no longer a single hunter. He ordered a sudden lateral turn, sharp rudder, brief surge of speed to disrupt the projected descent track. The maneuver cost precious battery power but introduced unpredictability. For several seconds, sonar contact blurred slightly. The destroyer captain adjusted immediately. Contact bearing shifting, maintain sweep, second ship adjust 5 degrees starboard. The escorts were not reacting blindly. They were updating. The next depth charge pattern was laid deeper and wider, compensating for the U-boat's turn. When the explosions came, they arrived not as random concussions, but as a tightening arc around projected position. One detonation struck closer than the rest. The hull shuddered violently, light bulbs burst, a storage locker tore loose and slammed across the compartment. In the forward torpedo room, a seam split enough to spray cold Atlantic water across steel flooring. Damage control teams rushed to contain it. Still survivable, but survivability was now a function of endurance. The commander realized the fundamental problem. He could evade individual patterns, but he could not erase the starting equation. The escorts had not discovered him accidentally. They had been guided here by data drawn hours earlier. The radio transmission had provided the first line on the chart. Everything since had been refinement. The destroyers were not searching for a submarine. They were narrowing a solution. And solutions do not fatigue. Inside the submarine, air quality began to degrade subtly. Carbon dioxide levels ticked upward. Crew fatigue sharpened nerves. Every new ping sounded closer than the last, even when it was not. The Atlantic outside remained indifferent. Cold, heavy, immense. But inside that immensity, the space available to the U-boat was shrinking mathematically. Another ping echoed through the hull. Another pattern armed above. The commander closed his eyes briefly, not in fear, but in recalculation. The area had been logged as secure. Now security was measured in meters of depth and minutes of battery. And neither lasted forever. The tracking had not required noise. Now the noise had begun. And it was methodical. By 06:52 hours, The U-boat was riding depth limits few captains admitted aloud. The hull groaned under pressure, a constant metallic complaint that settled into every man's nerves. Batteries were draining faster after repeated evasive bursts. Air was turning stale. Sweat and condensation mixed on steel walls. Above, the destroyers did not rush. They refined. Sonar contact remained steady, two ships now holding offset positions, tightening arcs with patient calculation. The U-boat attempted another sharp turn, engines surging briefly to distort acoustic signature. It bought seconds, not escape. The next depth charge pattern detonated closer than any before. The shockwave slammed through the hull with brutal force. Lights failed entirely. A valve housing cracked. Water sprayed into the aft compartment before damage control sealed it. The commander understood the equation clearly now. The escorts had not stumbled onto him. They had been guided, hours earlier, by the radio transmission he believed routine. This was not rediscovery. It was completion. The Atlantic felt smaller than steel walls, and patience above was running out of room below. Another ping echoed through the submarine, steady, confident. The commander closed his eyes briefly, recalculating. They had never been searching blindly. They had known roughly where to begin. The destroyers shifted again, laying a pattern not behind the submarine, but ahead of its projected escape. The geometry had become predictive. Depth charges rolled. Explosions erupted almost directly overhead. The hull flexed violently. A gauge needle snapped off. Fine cracks spidered across a bulkhead seam. Air thickened. Men coughed quietly, trying not to waste breath. The U-boat attempted a slow crawl along a new bearing, hopping to slip beneath the narrowing arc. But every movement was answered within minutes. Above, the escorts had no urgency, only certainty. The silence that once meant safety had become evidence. And evidence does not forget. By 07:30 hours, battery reserves were dangerously low. Structural strain warnings were no longer abstract. The hull could dive deeper, but not indefinitely. Another tight pattern might push steel past tolerance. The commander faced the final decision: remain submerged and risk catastrophic failure, or surface into enemy guns. He chose surface. Compressed air roared through ballast tanks. The submarine angled upward. Crew braced silently. Above, the destroyers detected the change instantly, sonar echo rising. When the U-boat broke the surface, grey dawn light flooded the bridge. The destroyers were already positioned. Guns trained. There was no dramatic chase, no confusion. Only inevitability. The submarine had not been hunted loudly. It had been guided into exhaustion. The logbook entry remained unchanged. Area secured, no further contact. It had been accurate by sound and sight, but not by signal. The Atlantic in 1943 was no longer a battlefield of noise alone. It was a network of listening stations, intersecting bearings, and disciplined patience. A 20-second transmission had drawn the first line. Every subsequent maneuver had narrowed it. The U-boat believed silence meant freedom. The Allies understood silence differently. They did not need to chase with constant sonar. They did not need to announce pursuit. They needed only to wait, calculate, and close. The submarine had never truly disappeared. It had simply been allowed to believe it had. In modern naval warfare, invisibility is fragile. Because even when no one is pinging, someone may still be plotting. And the tracking may never stop.